Hey everyone, and welcome to another episode of Spin It Reviews, and today I'm going to be counting down my top 5 least favorite albums of 2014. I should probably let you guys know two things right off the bat. One, this title is frankly misleading, catchy clickbait garbage. This isn't so much a list of the outright worst albums of 2014, so much it is just the albums that disappointed me the most, which you'll kind of get as this video goes on. And two, know that I never go into an album wanting to hate it. I much rather focus on things that I want to like. This is mostly because I don't like this hate culture that music fans have been about lately. You're not going to see me crapping on Nicki Minaj or Future or, I don't know, Attila just for the sake of it. So a big fat disclaimer right here, most of the artists on this list are ones that I generally do like and ones that I want to see the best out of, but was just genuinely let down by this time around. Also, if you want to see my full reviews of any of the albums mentioned here, or at least the ones that I actually have done full videos on, then they're all linked in the description. So with that out of the way, let's get to our dishonorable mentions, or albums that I generally do like, but couldn't help but feel unsatisfied by. First up is Bruce Springsteen's High Hopes. To me, even though this is really good musically, as you can usually expect from the E Street Band, this album has some of Bruce's most phoned-in, cliché, and frankly boring lyrics since the early 90s. Like I said in the review, this just feels like Wrecking Ball afterthoughts as far as the socio-political commentary goes, and it doesn't help at all that a lot of these songs are supposedly just reworked leftovers from previous albums. That being said, there were still some great songs on this, and the American Skin studio version was definitely worth the wait. Next are Pop Psychology by Neon Trees and Supercritical by Tings. Both are pop rock albums that are fine for what they are, I guess, but just lack a lot of the great qualities of their first two albums, and are definitely steps down from the more ambitious albums that preceded them. And in the case of Tower Glenn, I couldn't help but feel like he was spending more time promoting his sexuality than actually writing engaging songs. Now I'm going to touch on two albums I heard more recently that I did want to devote full videos to, but just in the rush of November and December and just getting around to all the albums I wanted to listen to, I just didn't have the time for. First off is Lenny Kravitz's Strut. Now, I've never really talked about this on the channel before, but Lenny Kravitz was one of my first favorite artists as a little kid, and Baptism was one of the first albums I ever owned. From there, I've always looked up to the guy, both as a songwriter and a musician who can meld genres seamlessly, and as a solo multi-instrumentalist who can still make his records have a fairly live feel to them, especially his last one, Black and White America. However, this new album, Strut, is easily the least compelling of his entire career. He said he wrote this whole album on one 2-week creative spurt while filming the Hunger Games Catching Fire, and it shows in just how rushed this whole thing sounds. Sure, there are cool little delves into different styles like the disco grooves on the lead single The Chamber, despite a mediocre at best guitar solo, but then you have just plain embarrassing songs like Sex, that even not for a not-so-subtle lyricist like Lenny, just takes it to a cringe-worthy level. And the second one is Big K.R.I.T's Cadillactica. I said back in the Run the Jewels review that unless this album topped that, that would be my top hip-hop album of the year. Well, congrats Run the Jewels, because this thing just underwhelmed me. K.R.I.T's been promoting his second major label release for over a year now, but like with his King Remembered in Time mixtape that introduced me to him last year, this thing is just an unfocused mixed bag of songs with actual substance and shallow luxury rap. Also, I can't help but feel like I'm the only one that finds that Big K.R.I.T contradicts himself at every turn, constantly promoting himself as different from everyone else, and then basing his entire album concept on glorifying materialism, right down to the title. He shows a ton of talent on songs like Mount Olympus, Life, Saturdays Equals Celebration, Third Eye, and even on some of the more braggadocious songs like King of the South and Mo Better Cool. So why doesn't he just do that for the length of the whole thing? Whatever, maybe I should check out some of his earlier mixtapes to find that. And lastly, our Jason Mraz's Yes, which, despite how uninspired it is and how cold it left me, I, for some reason, never really got my hopes that high for in the first place, and Nickelback's No Fixed Address, which I at least have to give credit for at least improving on their previous string of duds. So with that out of the way, let's get to the actual list, starting with number 5, and the one I'll easily get the most comments for, Foo Fighters' Sonic Highways. This is where it really starts to show that this list isn't so much about what was worse on a more objective level, but more what just disappointed me personally the most. And as you can tell from my shirt, I'm not exactly a hater of the band. I actually think this album's okay in the grand scheme of things. But that's just it. This is the Foo Fighters, and the Foo Fighters should not be making albums that are just okay. Especially when, 1, you're following up an album as great as Wasting Light, and 2, this is in conjunction with a concept as awesome as what they're doing with this HBO show. Going to 8 musically iconic cities and just taking inspiration from each one when making an album. That's actually kind of a genius idea. Now, I haven't seen the show since I don't have HBO, that rhymes, timely for Christmas, so I'm judging this album on its own merits, especially given that Dave Grohl said in interviews that this isn't meant to just be a soundtrack to the show, that's meant to hold up on its own. Sadly though, on its own merits, this album does not hold up very well on its own. Now don't get me wrong, there are some great songs on this album, like Something for Nothing, The Feast and the Famine, What Did I Do, and In the Clear. But with an exception here and there, they just sound like standard Foo Fighters songs you'd find on any other album of theirs, only with a lot fewer memorable tracks. Look, even though I do like the Foo Fighters, it's no secret that they're not exactly the most eclectic and diverse band around. They've been basically working with the same sound, more or less, for the last 20 years or so, and a concept like this was just the perfect chance for them to expand on their sound and change things up a bit and maybe add some more influences, and they just made themselves more stagnant instead, and that's what really disappointed me about this. Despite all the passion and research and cultural insight that supposedly went into this show, about 90% of references made to these cities are just these random facts and locations and big artist name drops that they could have gotten from a 10-minute Wikipedia search. Now, Dave's rebuttal about this common argument is that, of course they didn't completely adopt the styles of every city they went to, or else it would have just been this unfocused disaster of an album, so it had to be a Foo Fighters album through and through. And he does kinda have a point, but here's the thing, there's no reason to be so black and white about this. Come on, man, you've been a professional, acclaimed musician for about 25 years now. You should have the musical skill to be able to adopt little musical elements from each place you go to. You could have had a more syncopated beat when you went to New Orleans, or a more bluesy structure and riff and lyrical style when you went to Chicago, stuff like that. And you actually did do that fairly well on In the Clear when you adopted the Preservation Hall Jazz Band's horn section. That's the kind of stuff I'm talking about. But you just only did it on that one song and pretty much nothing else here, and that's why this album is just so subpar to a lot of people. Overall, this album was just a big waste of potential. Despite how great it was in theory, and despite how good of a lyricist and songwriter Dave Grohl is, it's clear that with this project he was just way out of his depth. Again, this album is by no means bad. Heck, if this was like a full review, then I'd give it like a 6.5. It's still decent, but given how great it could have been, it just had to have a spot on this list. We didn't get the best of you, Dave. That's all I'm saying. At number 4 is B.o.B's No Genre 2. Now, there are a lot of reasons why I could have left this off the list. It's a free mixtape rather than an official album, and like with Nickelback, it's at least more tolerable than his last couple disappointments. But the problem really lies in the name of this album, No Genre 2, aka a direct sequel to it is his most widely acclaimed mixtape, and for really good reason. Sure, you could say it's a reference to the label he started a couple years ago, but we all know why he named it this, to cash in on previous success in the hopes of getting people to care about him again. It's no secret that his last album, Underground Luxury, was a huge step down from both of his other commercially released projects, both commercially and in the eyes of the fans, thanks to dumbed-down, trendy beats lacking Bob's musicianship or even knack for memorable hooks, terrible features, and songs absolutely devoid of content, intelligence, or likability. Which is why I put it in my worst albums list last year, linked in the description if you're curious. And I was talking about Big K.R.I.T sometimes contradicting himself morally, but lately B.o.B's been taking that to a whole new level, lamenting the pitfalls of fame and bashing greedy people in one song, and then absolutely reveling in all of that in the next. Again, this mixtape is technically an improvement, and with great tracks like Follow Me, Many Rivers, and The Nation, it's clear that Bobby Ray can still impress when he wants to. The problem is that he doesn't want to enough, and as a result, everything he's done after Strange Clouds has just been really uneven. And one more thing I gotta ask, Bob, where's that rock EP you've been hyping up the last 2 years? I mean, maybe that'll get me to like you again, or at least stopping your Facebook page from becoming this cesspool of clickbait articles and share of hashtag relatable pictures. Number 3 on this list is the Fray's Helios, an album I'm sure you've already forgotten came out. Man, when the singles Love Don't Die and Hurricane came out late last year, I got really excited for this thing. Sure, Scars and Stories had some subtle progressions here and there, but it seemed like this album was going to mark a big change in the Fray's sound to something a lot more energized and fun. Only to listen to the rest of the album and realize just how misleadingly good those songs really were, because most of the rest of this album is just one dull, overproduced, cliche piano pop love song after another, without even the same amount of great melodies or interesting lyrics to fall back on to give it any kind of replay value. The Fray have been fading from relevance more and more over the last 2 years, and albums like this give a good case as to why. They promised progression and only gave regression, and for that reason, Helios definitely deserves a spot on this list. Number 2, whose inclusion will surprise absolutely no one who's seen my video on it, is Paula by Thicke. This is the one here where it really turns more into what was the most flat-out bad, rather than albums I actually, had high hopes for. Even on sheer principle, this would have landed on this list, basically acting as musical blackmail to try to get back his celebrity ex-wife, Paula Patton, right down to the name of the album. This isn't only one of the worst albums of 2014, it's one of the most manipulative, sleazy, and frankly creepy album concepts I've ever heard, period. When the lyrics aren't a lazy compilation of transparent sweet nothings, they're this insufferable whining about him frankly getting what he deserves for cheating on her multiple times, and a good majority of the time seeming to paint himself as the victim, or even using this fact as a pickup line for a rebound hookup. Not to mention that musically this album is just not memorable in any way, shape, or form. The sheer disaster this album's been, between selling 95% fewer copies in the US than Blurred Lines, which I just thought was a half-decent pop album if a bit spotty, the catastrophe that was the Ask Thicke hashtag, and the hilarious truth that Paula ended up officially filing for divorce shortly after this album's release, it looks like Thicke's been pretty much kicked out of the pop music world, and all I have to say is good riddance. And now for number 1. Now, some of you, especially those that have seen that aforementioned 13-minute unscripted rant about Paula, are probably scratching your heads as to why that isn't number 1. But here's the thing. Now, Paula is a bad album. I would go as far as to say it's a terrible album. But you could at least make the argument, if you were the most optimistic of Thicke fans, that it's ambitious, or that it's diverse, or that it at least has some sense of artistic integrity. But you couldn't say all that about my number 1 least favorite album of 2014, Maroon 5's 5, or V, or whatever it's called. Actually, it doesn't matter what it's called, because what I call it is garbage. Remember when Maroon 5 was a distinct and interesting voice in pop music? When they were an actual, band instead of just the Adam Levine experience for whenever he has time off from The Voice? Yeah, me neither, because at this point in their career, it looks like this whole selling out thing is going to be Maroon 5's game plan from here on out. Now, I didn't like Overexposed either, but you could at least make the argument that that had a cool funk influence and energy on some tracks, or that at no point was it actively grating on the ears. Here, though, we get 12 tracks of sterilized, completely neutered, non-instrumentation. Adam's autotuned falsetto on nearly every track. This just like nails on a chalkboard. And some of the most intelligent, insulting, misogynist pickup line lyrics this side of a Young Money release. It's always a bad sign when the lead single underwhelms you. Your feelings on it don't change at any point whatsoever, and it still ends up one of your favorite songs on the album. Also, this isn't directly related to the album itself, but the fact that Animals was the smash hit from this instead of It Was Always You says something about society that I don't even want to get into right now. I am so glad that this is the album that I ended up doing with ARTV on his channel, because it was just so fun to just rip this album apart for the corporate product it is. And now I was willing to overlook Overexposed, because given that it was probably reactionary to the lesser success of Hands All Over. But now that they did it twice, I think it's safe to say the days of quality material from Maroon 5 are pretty much over. Especially given that at one point they promised that this album would be a return to form. I don't know, maybe some of that hair bleach seeps into Adam's brain. So those are my top 5 disappointment / worst / least favorite albums of 2014. What were yours? Do you agree with any of my picks? And more importantly, do you disagree? If so, please try to be civil in your arguments, because I can assure you that fangirl rage will only be met with the utmost of snark and sarcasm. Also, more lists are coming, so feel free to share this around with anyone who might be interested, like the Facebook page in the description for updates and commentaries and music news, and hopefully I'll see you in the next episode of Spin It Reviews. And given I filmed most of this around Christmas Eve, hopefully Santa didn't leave any of these albums in your stocking.